Hey guys, all right, week 22, we are talking about civil rights this week. So we're going to talk about the modern civil rights movement to determine the social, political, and economic impact that it had in Alabama. So the fight for equal rights. According to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, all citizens are guaranteed to equal rights. However, so those amendments, even though they were added to the Constitution after the Civil War, so after the Civil War means before World War I, before the Great Depression, before Reconstruction, for all of that we've already talked about, all of these amendments were added right after the Civil War. But we know that it took a lot of years, a lot of court battles, and even more sacrifices before all of the people in Alabama were actually considered equal and not separate, because for a long time, that's how it was. A few weeks ago, we talked about the Jim Crow laws, which grew out of the black codes in the southern states. Those remained in force until 1964 and required racial segregation, which means that they were separated. People were separated according to their race. And it was the racial segregation of African Americans in all public facilities, all public places. The laws require that public schools be segregated and that most public places like restaurants, trains and buses, all of that have separate facilities for whites and African Americans. 1964 was not that long ago, guys. So when you think about that, it's kind of crazy to think that, so all of your grandparents were alive then. So it's just crazy to think that we know people who were around when all of this terrible stuff was happening. This forced African Americans to accept less than white Americans because of the facilities for them were often inferior or less than to those of white facilities. Okay, and you would see things like this: waiting room for colored only by order of the police department, waiting room for white only by order of police department. Just crazy, terrible ways that people were treated. And like I said, your grandparents were around when this was happening, so you might want to ask them what they thought of the civil rights movement when it was going on. And that doesn't matter if you're African American or you're white, because it was terrible no matter what color you were to see people treated that way. During the first half of the 20th century, African Americans yearned or really wanted the day when their children could attend good schools with new books and new equipment. Now, because of racial segregation, African American schools were not as good as white schools. They didn't get the new books. They didn't get the new equipment, if they got any at all. Their buildings were typically older and falling apart. So they didn't get the good education that they deserved just because of their skin color. They wanted all the same opportunities as white citizens, which they should have, right? In the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, that was promised to them after the civil rights, or after the Civil War, not Civil War, or civil rights, after the Civil War. The Civil War was in the 1800s, guys. So why did it take until the late 1900s to even think about fixing this? It just was ridiculous. African American community leaders encouraged their fellow citizens to be proud of their achievements. They knew more could be done if they worked together. The NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was a group that had been formed in 1909 to work for the rights of African Americans in the United States. This is their logo right here for the NAACP. And if you notice the balance here. So that balance is a symbol of justice, of equal. Rosa Parks, E.D. Nixon, and Johnny Carr were some of those who attended a meeting in Montgomery in 1947. And we are going to talk about a few of those people this week, along with another very important man who I'm sure you already know we're going to talk about, since we're talking about the civil rights movement. But this is all we are talking about today. So I will see you tomorrow for day 2. Make sure you check your folders for your assignments. Have a great day, guys.